Right, welcome everyone. My name is Ari Goldstein. I'm Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust in New York City. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's Stories Survive program with Dr. Miriam Klein Kassenoff, a child survivor of the Holocaust who is the founding director of the University of Miami Holocaust Teacher Institute, the education chairperson at the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach, Florida, and the education specialist for Holocaust studies for Miami-Dade County Public Schools. In these roles, she is responsible for all staff development and Holocaust teacher training for Miami-Dade County's public schools. Miriam is also a member of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum Council of Holocaust Centers and the creative founder of the Screening the Holocaust film series in cooperation with the Miami Jewish Film Festival. During Miriam's presentation today, please feel free to share questions and comments in the Zoom chat, and we'll address as many as we can in a Q&A period towards the end of the program. Without further ado, welcome Miriam. Thanks for being with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Ari. It has been a pleasure working with you, and I want to thank the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City for inviting me to be your guest presenter today. A little anecdote to start the day. It seems that here on Miami Beach, of which I'm sure many of you have been watching the news of our spring break revelers, sometime around 10 o'clock last night, our entire building where I live went black, in that the electricity went off to the point where I couldn't even find the light that I needed. This morning, I woke up early, worried, and ran to my computer to make sure that internet was working so I could do this presentation. Of course, it wasn't, and it isn't. So, you know, it's really important to have good friends that save you. And the first thing I did was one of my friends, who's a member of your museum, Ralph Berger, I happen to know was at his friend's right across the street from me. So I texted quickly and said, please help. I don't want to give up doing this lecture. I need your help. And sure enough, they picked me up, invited me over here, set me up at a laptop, which I've never used in my life. And here I am. So I want to dedicate this presentation to my friend Drew Tabone and Ralph Berger for being so kind to come to my aid so that I wouldn't have to cancel this today. It's really, really my honor to be here. Let me begin on how I came to find out who I was, who I am, and the journey that led me to discovery of how I, along with my parents and my infant brother, escaped to where I am today in America. I know that many of you have heard survivor testimony from my older brothers and sister survivors. Mine is a little bit different because mine is really a narration to you, and I'll explain to you why it's a narration. So please allow me in this time for the next 30 minutes or so to read my story to you, because there are so many dates and so many places that even if I've given this story for over 20 years, I still need my script in front of me. So let me begin. The first slide that you're seeing here is in memory of my family. That's my father in the upper left-hand corner, Rabbi Maurice Klein. That's my mother, Sarah Klein. That's my brother, Ted Klein. These are the three people I escaped with. To the right was the last picture that was taken at one of my teacher institutes of my mother and me before she died. She lived to 99, a blessed memory. How did I get a hold of the story I'm going to tell you? About 22 years ago, was sitting at the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach, and I had a little desk there because I do work for the school district here, but I also work with the University of Miami, but I also volunteer and am education chairperson at the Holocaust Memorial. And there was this book sitting on the table for me, waiting for me, a long oblong picture book. And as I opened the cover, I went, oh my God. I had known all my life that I had escaped as a 5-year-old with my parents from Slovakia. I also knew that we had come on a ship called the Ciudad de Seville, and that we had gone through Lisbon, but I didn't have the details. And there in front of me was a picture of the ship. And underneath it, it said, for further information for those who might have been on the Ciudad de Seville in 1941, please contact the HIAS in New York, HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Association Society. Ask for Valerie Bajarov. So I thought, all right, I've done so much research, let me give this a chance too. I called, Valerie answered, and I told him who I was, what my name is today, and that I came on that ship, and could he give me more information? And he said, wait a minute. I've been, I think, looking for you. What's your name? What was your maiden name? And so forth. He said, let me get back to you. So I thought, sure. And I hung up. And sure enough, 15 minutes later, he got back to me. Next slide, please, Ari. So today's presentation is not specifically about the Holocaust, the murder of the Jews of Europe, but certainly because of the Holocaust. Yet it is more a story of escape, hiding, and being on the run from the Nazi Holocaust. It specifically answered that often asked question, why didn't they just leave, as if it was easy to do? So I have a story to tell you today. It's a true story of fear, hiding, running, escape, strength, resilience, and hope. The next slide, please, Ari. And the next one. So when Valerie called me from the HIAS, this is what he showed me, or he on the phone told me about. He said to me, was your dad Miriam Klein? And I said, yes. And he said, was your mother Sally? And I said, no. Her name was Sarah. And is your name Mary? Was your name Mary? I said, nope, you got the wrong family. My name is not Mary. It never was Mary. And he said, and who is Tibor? And then I knew that he had found my family. I said, that's my baby brother. And he said, well, we have your arrival card here. I've had it for a long time. And you were to be supported by the congregation Hatzeres Israel in Chicago by your aunt. And we have not been able to find you because we have all your paperwork of the journey that you made. Can you come to New York? We like to do this kind of thing in person. I was so shocked that I had been found that it took me 6 months to even get it together to take a trip to New York and meet with Valerie. When I met with him at the HIAS office, he handed me a huge stack of papers like this in a notebook. And he said, this is your life, running and hiding from the Holocaust. And we sat and talked, of course, for quite a long time. When I came home, though, I thought, well, what do I do with this? I'm not really a writer. And at that time, I didn't consider myself much of a researcher. But I knew that I had to put this story in some kind of order to understand it. So what I did was I took a portion of my apartment and I spread all the documents out on the floor and I started putting them in chronological order by date. And after a few months, I had everything in order by date. And then I sat down and I started writing this story. Next slide, please. In the early 1930s, my dad, Moshe Klein, was a young rabbinical student in Kosice, Czechoslovakia. In order to complete his education, he went to the prestigious Munkach yeshiva nearby for his smicha, the rabbinate degree. Near but far enough that he had to live in Munkach while there. Besides his smicha, his goal was to bring home a Jewish bride to the Klein family in Kosice, where people of the Klein family eagerly waited the event, including my grandfather, Rav Abraham Klein, the head rabbi of Kosice, which was a Hungarian city in 1938, then became Kasha by 1940. And by then the Nazis had come into Kasha, and most of the Jewish men in the community were taken to Hungarian forced labor army battalion camps and put to hard labor by the Hungarian army, trained by the Nazi mentality. So back to the story. My dad heard there were two beautiful sisters in the home of a Rav David Schwartz in Munkach, and they were twins. Two beautiful women. Why not? So as the story goes, my dad managed to get invited to the home of Rav David Schwartz for Shabbat. And there he was able to enjoy the company of the city's beautiful twins, Lily and Sarah. How could he tell them apart? Only a romantic can know, but he fell in love with Lily. However, Lily did not fall in love with him, for she already had a boyfriend in mind. And so began what I call the conspiracy of the twins of Munkach. My Aunt Lily conspired with Sarah to pass my dad off to her. And up to the weeks prior to the marriage, my dad never knew. When he was finally told, he shrugged and he said, okay, so we'll learn to love each other. And they did for over 65 years. As the story moves on, my dad brought Sarah home to Kosice, to the Klein family. Next slide, please, which was a very revered and respected family in Kosice. And there I am before fleeing. I was born, the firstborn, named Marika, and then the winds of war. Although my dad had gotten support papers from my mother's older sister, Bessie, who had married a visiting American student in Munkach, and then she returned with him in the late 20s, and they were both now living in Chicago, safely in the United States. But she was always watching the news and had always sent information to my dad, begging him to get my mother out. However, my mother would not entertain the thought in 1939 of leaving all she loved and knew to go to a strange land. Besides, she wanted another child who was born in March of 1940, Tibor, otherwise known today as the Honorable Judge Ted Klein. Then, when the Nazis occupied Slovakia in 1939 and took all the leading men of the community to the Hungarian concentration army labor camps, my mother realized her mistake because my father was taken in front of me. In December of 1940, my father, of blessed memory, Rabbi Maurice Klein, managed to escape from the Hungarian labor army battalion work camp Sharash Potok, where he had been a prisoner for a few months. When he rushed home to his family in Kosice, he finally convinced my mother, Sarah, to embark on an escape route to Lisbon, Portugal, where there were ships waiting to take Jews to safety if one could make the journey in such perilous times. And one had to have support papers, visas in hand, and a reservation for a ship. It seems that my dad, without my mother knowing it, had made all those arrangements with my Aunt Bess in Chicago before he was taken to the camp. So reluctantly and with much fear, Sarah agreed to leave Kosice and all she dearly loved, knowing that if she did not, my father would be recaptured and taken back to the labor camp. What do I remember? I remember her taking me to see her twin sister, Lily, who had married the man that she loved and now also had two little children, two little girls my age. And I remember her saying, Lily, we've got to go. Come with us. Don't stay here. The Jews of Europe will be murdered. And I remember my Aunt Lily saying, Sarah, I'm not going anywhere. What will happen to us here will happen to you while you're running. You're crazy. I'm staying. And that was the last time my mother or I ever saw my Aunt Lily, her twin sister, again. So my mother took me, Marika, a small child of 4, and my new infant brother, Tibor, only 9 months old. And along with my father, both of them only 33 years old, fled in December 1940 from Kosice and all we knew to all we did not yet know. Please look at this map. Look where it says December 1940. We had to go alone. We were not with Varian Fry or any other rescuers, all the way over to Lisbon, Portugal, where we were to board not the Ciudad de Seville at that time. We had reservations for another ship, which I will tell you about in a minute. But that one was due to leave in late March or April. So it's December 1940. We certainly had time, if everything worked out all right, to get there. However, here's the timeline of what happened. November 1940, my dad escapes the camp. 1940, December, we begin our journey. My dad returned home to Kosice. He retrieved the visa papers, the passenger reservation to board the HIAS ship, due to leave Lisbon on April 15, 1941. So we had to be in Lisbon by that date. Why Lisbon? Because as Neil Lockery in his book, War in the Shadows of the City of Light says, and I quote, if you wanted out of Europe during World War II, all signs pointed to Portugal. The same was true if you were a spy and wanted in. The leader of Portugal, Salazar, saw the refugees as a hugely complicating factor. He was trying to maintain Portugal's neutrality, but feared a German invasion. So the neutral and so led by Salazar managed to play the world powers off each other and avoid invasion. Lisbon was the bottleneck of Europe. It was the last chance to get out. Thus, there were desperate Jews crowded in the streets of Lisbon. Marion Kaplan, in her excellent book, Hitler's Jewish Refugees, says, I quote, Lisbon, Portugal, quickly became the port of departure from the continent if one could negotiate the complex steps of getting there. End of quote. So a sample of the complexities is what we faced. Whereas we were rushing and running to make the deadline of our visa entry papers into Lisbon, Portugal, which expired in January, due to train delays and many more unexpected events, we missed the deadline by 2 days. Thus, we arrived in the border town of Badajoz, Spain on January 20th, 1941. And we found ourselves hopelessly and frustratingly stopped in our journey. We were sent, the border guards also were playing a neutral game, and often their police, leaning more towards supporting the Nazi regime, sometimes allowed Jews passage, but many times, depending on the border guard that one would encounter, according to my mother's testimony of a particular experience, Jews were often turned back. So in our case, we were going to be turned back until my mother somehow figured out a way to get one of the border guards to be pitying our small family. So out of some pity for our small family, my mother managed to beg that instead of being arrested or sent back to Slovakia, to allow us to at least stay in a hotel until we could get some more money and papers in order. And she managed with my father to bribe the guard also. Thus, we found ourselves interred in a hotel with no money and nowhere to turn for help. My dad made friends very easily wherever he went. And so by chance, he made friends in the hotel with a non-Nazi German tourist who took great pity on us and told my dad he would help him. He, I do not know his name, dictated in his words to my dad to write this letter to the Jewish community in Lisbon, and then promised my dad he would get it delivered. I say in his words because I had to figure out that although this is my dad's handwriting, the verbiage is not my dad's. It's not the way he would have talked. Let me read the translation of this very important letter and document of history. It would have been a letter like any refugee trying to escape might have written for help. The letter was addressed to the Jewish Aid Society. That's what he called it. That's what the German knew it at. He didn't know that it was called HIAS. That was in Lisbon. Honorable Jewish Aid Society. We are a Jewish family from Hungary on the way to the United States of America because the American consul in Budapest gave us a travel visa because I have been accepted as a rabbi in Chicago. Unfortunately, the Portuguese visa ran only till the 18th of January, and because of train delays, which have consumed days, we only arrived here on the 20th in this border city, and we can't proceed any further. The Portuguese consul here sent a dispatch on January 20th to the Lisbon police requesting an extension of our visa because we do have Clipper tickets and therefore have secured a trip to America, but we have received no answer. This part is extremely difficult for me to read as an adult, knowing how my parents felt about me and my brother. We are here with two small children, a 4-year-old girl and a baby boy of 10 months. The children are suffering from hunger. We are used to hunger, but it's tragic to see how it affects the innocent children. Hence, if it is possible, please help your Jewish brothers because the situation is getting desperately tragic. We are not even in a situation to pay for the hotel because our money is gone. We have some money in the Lisbon bank, but we can't get to the money because we can't get to Lisbon. Rabbi Miriam Klein from Kosice, Hungary. Perhaps you could intervene with the police on our behalf in order to complete the process. Our freedom of movement is limited. We are interred in the hotel in our room. We're not allowed out. Please attempt, my Jewish brothers, to help us in whatever way you can. We are here in the Hotel dos Naciones, and as you can see from the letterhead, perhaps you could telephone me. That would be very generous of you. Receive my greetings, my Jewish brothers, Rabbi Moritz Klein, Hotel Naciones in Bad Hotz. I think this is an extremely important document. Well, it appears from the chronology of this letter that we were very soon after allowed to enter Lisbon. It is now February 15th, 1941. We finally arrived in Lisbon after running throughout Eastern Europe, always one step ahead of the Nazi occupation. We had gone through Hungary, Yugoslavia, Italy, France, and Spain, always just as we left the country on the heels of Nazis coming into the country. Where I just read to you of our plight, we were detained. I was 4 years old then, and my new infant brother, Tibor, was 9 months old when we began our journey of escape. Not an easy task for a mother and father to do. We had been on the road for 3 months, and as previously mentioned, the Nyasa ship was leaving on April 15th. So we had time to make the ship for which we had verified passage, just not the entire paid ticket we were to discover, which was at that time $1,000. In addition, we now had one more serious problem. Our visa entry papers to the United States expired on March 13th. So once again, we had to get new visa papers, which had to be acquired if we were going to make that April 15th departure of the NIASA. The lines at the consul office in Portugal were long with other refugees in the same dilemma. What were we to do? My parents had heard rumors, possibly circulated by police, that the refugees might be sent back. My mother was very worried about that. The HIAS offices had relocated in Lisbon from France in June 1940. They set up long lines for waiting for the refugees who were in the same position. During the year of 1939, there was, among many other offices throughout the world, a HIAS office in Paris. But in June 1940, when the Nazis occupied France, they moved the office to Lisbon. It is now February 15th, April 28th, 1941. The next step was to help house the refugees while waiting our visas and other papers, including money for passage. We were put in a small tourist hotel on the outskirts of Portugal. My mother, Sarah, remembered it well, for in the chaos and horror, it was a pleasant enough place to stay, except for the constant anxiety and fear she felt of the unknown. For me, as a child, my memories are much anxiety, fear, insecurity, listening to my parents speaking in Yiddish and Hungarian about what would become of us. The local Jewish community of Lisbon had about 1,500 to 2,000 people there, and their leaders convinced the authorities to place us in pensions or small hotels. By the way, I was to find out in all my research that many other famous dignitaries that you know of in history were in Lisbon waiting with us at the same time. To name a few, Marc Chagall, the artist, Heinrich Mann, the writer, Hannah Arendt, the writer-philosopher, Peggy Guggenheim, the famous art aficionado, and I just discovered Ian Fleming and many others. Interestingly enough, if you research their bios, none of them says anything about their Lisbon experience. It just says they fled Europe. What follows during this period of time, from February 15th to April 18th, comes from Valery Bazarov, and I am indebted to him and to HIAS for giving me these documents. It's now March 21, 1941. The Lisbon HIAS office from the Chicago office finally got the $1,000 needed for the passage on the ship, which we had reservations. The NIASA departure, remember, was to leave April 14, 1941. But as we watched from the shoreline, it left without us because the new visa entry papers to get into the United States had not arrived. The HIAS was trying to get the funds together, not only for the $1,000 passage money for my aunt in Chicago, but they also needed an additional $300 for processing fees, which evidently they were trying to do not only for us, but for thousands of other Jews who were waiting. March 21st, 1941, the money for the ship arrives for our ticket. April 15th, the ship leaves without us because our entry papers for the United States did not arrive. What were we to do? We could only stay in Lisbon for a short period of time. Once again, my dad and mother had to now make new decisions and plans, anything not to have to return to the unknown. Although my mother told me she would have been very glad at this point to take her two small children and go home, or she fleetingly even thought about giving us away to a Jewish family in Portugal. April 28, 1941, the visa entry papers finally arrived, but the HIAS has already left. Now we're waiting and waiting for another ship. Finally, May 15th, we board the Ciudad de Seville. The HIAS and the American Joint Distribution had arranged this passage. It was a huge passenger cargo liner, one of the last few ships to leave Lisbon carrying Jews to safety in 1941. Had it been just 6 months later, January 1942, the final solution was planned to murder all the Jews of Europe. We had made it just in time. May 30th, we stop in Cuba for 24 hours and some passengers get off. Finally, June 3rd, 1941. Although my dad did not keep a diary of the trip, I have my mother and father's memories and my own. I read an incredible book that I want to give credit to for the quotes that I'm going to give you. It's called The Bridal Chair. It's the story about Ida Chagall, the artist Chagall's daughter, who was on the Navamar, which was also sailing to America as I was on the Ciudad. So I'm going to quote from The Bridal Chair. The dangers that lay ahead from the moment they left Lisbon and boarded the ship assaulted the passengers from the first day at sea. Rumors circulated there was a shortage of drinking water, and passengers panicked as distraught mothers worried about their small children. The ship could not sail a direct course as the German Navy had turned the Atlantic Ocean into a maritime battlefield. Submarines lurked beneath rising and falling waves, stalking freighters and passenger ships. The seas turned turbulent and the ship plowed through storms, heaving dangerously from side to side. Many were sick from the turbulence, and when the storm subsided and the sea was calm, the observant Jews were seen on the deck as my father was, putting on his talit, prayer shawls, and praying to God for us to safety after all we had been through, just not to die on the ship and be thrown into the ocean. End of quote. My mother was terrified, not letting me out of her sight. All this I remember with clarity. I do remember. I read now and quote again from her book. One morning, a flock of gulls appeared, swooping down and sailing gracefully on the crests of foam-laced waves. Gulls, said the passengers, we must be approaching land. End of quote. Our family realized New York. We had arrived safely in the harbor of New York, and then New Jersey, Hoboken, to be specific. Ari, can you hear me?
Yes, Miriam, put the slides back.
Arrival in America, June 3rd, 1941. We disembark into the turmoil of immigration, answering questions, pushing, crowded, handing over documents, officials asking questions. My dad is desperately searching for our papers. My mom is grasping my hand for dear life, holding my infant brother in her arms. My mom and dad are searching endlessly in the crowd for a familiar face, for my aunt, for someone to help us, where to go, what to do. I feel and breathe my parents' fear, and I'm afraid too. No one's here to greet us. My aunt did not receive notification in time for her to make plans to leave Chicago. Many of us were in the same situation. No money left, no family to meet us. Strange new land. We can't speak the language. Finally, after about 2 weeks, my aunt from Chicago arrived and we left the shelter to begin our new lives in America. It was June 1941. The world and American Jewry did not yet know the horrors and the fate that awaited the rest of European Jews who were not as lucky as we were, but they would know soon, all too soon. So what became of the Klein family left behind in Kosice? Of the 15,000 Jews of Kosice, 12,000 were immediately gassed upon their arrival on a transport in 1944 at Auschwitz, the same transport Elie Wiesel was on. The Klein family survived by hiding in an attic in the Kosice ghetto and in the caves in the forest of Slovakia, aided by Gentile rescue, which is another story for another time. My grandfather, grandmother, aunts, and uncles all survived. And how well I remember seeing my grandfather and my grandmother after the war getting off a plane in New York, and my grandfather with his Hasidic garb, bending to the ground and kissing it. 300 Jews who had fled and survived before the last transport returned to Kosice immediately after the war. Among them, 6 of the Klein family, who all ultimately emigrated to Israel, Bolivia, and the United States. But no, we were never to see my mother's twin sister, Lily, and her family ever again. We, of course, were already safe here in the United States. So what happened to our little family? My parents wanted an American child as soon as possible. So my brother Hank Klein arrived in 1944, today a prominent, respected member of the business community in Miami, Florida. I became who I am today, a Holocaust educator, writer, teacher, trainer, speaking all over the country, giving this testimony. Tibor, the infant Tibor, was appointed a federal judge by President Bush in 2004, one of the few child survivors of the Holocaust on the federal bench, the late Honorable Judge Ted Klein. You can imagine the joy in my family. My mother literally cavilled every time she said, "My son, the judge." And then in 2006, tragedy struck. Ted suddenly died of an unknown lung disease at the age of 64. After schlepping him throughout Eastern Europe for 8 months, I had to go tell my 96-year-old mother that she had lost her son. My dad, of blessed memory, was the associate rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Miami Beach, Rabbi Maurice Klein. He died on Rosh Hashanah Eve, 2002. My dear mother, Sarah, the matriarch of the family, was 99 years old when she died in 2007, a few months after Ted. No, she did not die of old age, but of heartbreak over losing her son, the judge. She lived on Miami Beach and was the queen of the Lincoln Road Mall. Her final comment as I showed her these documents before she died, and I asked her, what did she think of all this research I had done, was simply in her Hungarian accent, "Darling, I think me still owe the HIAS $300. So it seems as I stand before you, I am the only one left of this little family of 4 who ran, hid, and escaped the Holocaust, still standing. Why have I been spared in these last years of deep losses? I don't know, but I must only assume is to keep telling the tale, to speak for Maurice, Sarah, and Ted until my voice will no longer be heard. And you are then charged with telling the story for me, for us. My final comment, as I once heard a refugee child survivor say, the experience of my parents is woven through the fabric of my soul, and I am compelled to tell it to the world. Thank you for listening to me share this story with you today. And so I will end there. I know that Ari wants to leave time for questions, so I can explain that last slide somehow during the questions. But this worked. I didn't know if it would. Here I am, not in my comfortable apartment at my friend's and using a laptop that I've never used. And I'm thrilled that I had the opportunity to do this. I also want to thank my friend Ellen Greenberg, who introduced me to you, Ari. and made the arrangements that I would be able to tell the story for the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which, by the way, I was there for the opening of that museum. Yes.
And we're nearing the 25th anniversary. Well, I echo my thanks to Ellen and Miriam. That was so moving and interesting to hear your story. I do want to take audience questions, but let me, if it's all right with you, put up that final slide now so you can explain it before we move on to other questions that people have.
Okay, so the reason I think this slide is important is I think most of us always wonder and this answers a question, do I have any heirs? Whether our children are listening. And, you know, I have a grown son, David, an attorney, my son, the attorney. I have a grandson, a daughter, Debbie, and I have grandchildren. And I know that they're proud of me and what I do and that they are listening. But what really shocked me was one morning I opened my email after my mother died, and there was this email for my son, and he had written, "Mom, I know today's an important day." And I couldn't register why he said that. And I said, "Why?" And this is what he wrote. He said, "Yes, today's the day. I don't have a candle at work." It was on my mother's yahrzeit, a year after she died. Or no, not a year after, maybe, because I see it's too, anyhow. But I set aside a few quiet moments to let the memories flow. And my most vivid memory of her is the first time she told me the story of escaping from Europe. Until then, it always seemed to me that she was just so quiet, submissive, in her old school European ways. I was probably only 11 or 12, and when she told me the story, it was riveting. She was suddenly as powerful and strong in the way she spoke as she must have been in helping to guide your family through that time. So I never knew that my son had that conversation with my mother. And here, that's the intergenerational. We find out things from our children, from our grandchildren, and it looks like David does carry on the story, or that he is involved in it. So, yeah.
And how amazing that you have championed so much Holocaust education work in the Miami area as a reflection of your own family's experience.
Yeah, I believe in fate. And I think I was destined to do this, which is why I made every effort to come over here today across the street. When I got to America, I was the only one in the family who spoke English. So I played teacher every night when I came home from school. I was already 5 and 6 when we arrived here. And I made my parents sit down in a little room with a little chalkboard, and I would teach them everything I had learned. Thus became the root of my being an English teacher. I have a master's degree in language arts. And so I thought, well, that's fine. I was happy being an English teacher. But then an opportunity came up 27 years ago with the American Survivor Gathering, Survivors of the Holocaust in New York, where Ben and Blanksteen, the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto, were still living. And they were choosing 30 teachers to take to Israel, to Lachamei Ghettoot, to learn how to teach the Holocaust through Jewish resistance. And I was the Florida teacher they chose, and that turned my whole career and life around. As a matter of fact, in the New York Times yesterday, or the other day, there was an article by the author Judy Battalion, who has just written a book on women in the Holocaust. And she mentions Blanksteen. And I wrote to the New York Times and I said, that's who trained me and started me on my road of being a professor of education for Holocaust training teachers. And they printed it, so I was kind of proud of that. So I think I was destined to do what I'm doing and still doing it. That's what I'm proud of, that we have a superintendent and a staff at the school board in Miami-Dade, the 3rd largest school district in America, that feels that even though I'm at my age, that I'm worthy enough to still be teaching and training and be employed. And I think that's really a role model for women, that we can continue to do what we want to do as long as we have the support, as I do.
Absolutely. Miriam, there's a question here from Allison who says, can you please talk a little bit about going into schools with your story? What age groups do you normally speak to and what's their response?
That's an excellent question. So I still now virtually will speak to students, but my main task for the past 10, 15 years is that I run seminars and teacher training institutes, which I hope your participants will join this June. We're having our 20th. I will go into upper middle and high school with my story, because remember, I'm not giving a testimony like most Holocaust survivors do from their memory. I'm reading sort of an academic script, and I feel that it's very important to have the students be engaged and learning about this piece of history and understanding the dates and the journey. And I'm not so sure, I definitely don't think it's for elementary. I speak mainly to middle, high school, college. I've been doing a lot of college classes virtually, and a lot of organizations. I did Salem State College the other night, and so I find that my particular story is best for upper middle and high school.
Miriam, here's another question. You are among the youngest survivors left to share their stories. What do you see as the future of Holocaust education?
Well, I'm also one of the Holocaust educators that thinks the future is excellent. I'm very engaged with many organizations that I think are doing an incredible job of Holocaust education. Namely, right there where you are, the Jewish Heritage Museum. You have an incredible curriculum that people can access. Every major center in America has got curricula. They've got survivor speakers that you can go on their website and hear. The Shoah Foundation is doing an incredible job. The United States Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem. I have colleagues in Pittsburgh, Classroom Without Borders. Everyone's doing an incredible job. And I think Holocaust education is very strong. It's in great demand. There are waiting lists for college classes. We have at least 10 electives just in the Holocaust alone in Miami-Dade County schools. I know the Broward and Palm Beach County have been doing a superb job. My colleagues up in Tampa at the Tampa Holocaust Museum, the Holocaust Documentation Center, the Holocaust Memorial. I think that Holocaust education is in excellent hands, and I'm not in the least worried about it.
That's a very heartwarming and exciting response for those of us in the audience to hear, because you know this so well.
Well, I'm a little tired of all the criticism about it. For example, when they come out with all these statistics that the millennials don't know where Auschwitz is, or they can't name 5 ghettos. Can you name 5 ghettos off the top of your head?
Well, I work at the Holocaust Museum, but I think it's a situation.
I mean, these questions are ridiculous, these surveys. To go around to strangers and say, can you name 5 ghettos from the Holocaust? Of course they can. That doesn't suggest that there isn't enough Holocaust education going on. Absolutely not. I disagree with some of the surveys.
That's an important perspective. I know that we were heartwarmed last year by a survey that looked at visits to Holocaust museums and a correlation to Holocaust knowledge. And the conclusion of the survey was people who go to Holocaust museums end up having deeper knowledge about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust later in life. And it seems sort of obvious, but it isn't necessarily. So it was an important affirmation of the work that we do.
We have hundreds of students going through our Holocaust memorial here every day, except for the pandemic this year. I guess you can see I'm very frustrated about all this. It's really, you know, people say to me, well, you're in your bubble. You're down in Miami and you're doing this great job, but you don't know that up in North Dakota or South Dakota or in some Midwestern. Well, that's not true. We have Holocaust education advocates in almost every state in the United States, all working very hard to present Holocaust education programs. I just had lunch here yesterday with a colleague from Philadelphia that has just now made connections with the Philadelphia school district to do PDs and professional development with them. I think Holocaust education is doing a good job. I think the teachers are doing a good job. I think that, as I say, I have no concerns that it'll be okay after the survivor's gone, which is a phrase that I hate because I'm still here. Yeah. I keep telling people, don't introduce that the survivors will still be gone. I'm still here. And yes, there's excellent Holocaust education in Canada. I'm very good friends with Marilyn Sinclair in Toronto. She is doing an outstanding job. And they're even having a whole week in May, Liberation 75, of speakers and workshops and classes. So you can't tell me that there's a problem with Holocaust education.
Right on, Miriam. I want to transition for a moment. There's a question here from Denise to understand more deeply your journey from Slovakia to Lisbon. Were you on trains? Or how did you actually get to Portugal?
So, you know what? That's a really good question. And a part of it is a mystery that bothers me. What I told you is what I know. What I told you is what I know. I repeat that. And that comes from years of research. What I don't know is where did we sleep at night? Where did we have dinner? Who gave us food? Where did we eat? I mean, I don't mean to sound trivial, but I'll never forget one student, I think, who had a new baby brother said, where did your mom get diapers for the baby? Sounds trivial, but I don't know. Now, I have worked with top scholars. Dr. Rosette in Yad Vashem does a wonderful talk. Google him, Robert Rosette, about the Hungarian fascist labor camps and how it was possible to escape. I only can tell you that we did take trains almost the whole time because I remember losing my dad from one train to another. It's one of the dark memories that I have that haunt me, that somehow my dad got on one train and my mom and I and the baby got on another. And I can still hear in my ears constantly my mother screaming, Moritz, Moritz, where are you? Where are you? We lost daddy. And we found him. So I do have that memory of trains, darkness, night, the train sound. I don't know in the journey of the 7-8 months where we slept at night. I would love to find out. And I'm not through researching to the point where I, even when I was in Washington before the pandemic, went to the museum and did a research through the Bad Arolsen archives. And we found a woman named Lily Berkowitz, because she married her boyfriend, Joseph Berkowitz, who might be my aunt, but there were 2 or 3 Lily Berkowitzes. And what we found of the one that matches the closest was that she was sent to Auschwitz. Her family was killed, the babies, my cousins, and was last seen wandering around a DP camp. And that's as close as I've gotten to finding Lily. I will say, though, that as good a family as my mother had, as happy as she was with Moritz, the wrong guy, with the pride that she had of the 3 of us, my brother became a judge and so forth. her yearning and longing for her twin sister was present and evident every day of my life. And I only hope that she's with her today.
Oh.
I hope that Lily and Sarah are together.
Miriam, have you ever gone back to Kosice or Lisbon to retrace the steps of your journey?
So I did go back to Kosice. It was quite a trip. I have not been to Lisbon, but guess what? On one of these programs, I got an email from this lovely woman named Dara Jeffries. And she said, "Dear Miriam, I grew up in Lisbon. I'm the head of the Jewish community in Porto, and I live part-time in Miami Beach near you. And I'm going to make sure that you're invited to give this talk." And just about a month ago, she called me and said, "Guess what? I bought your ticket. We're going the day after Yom Kippur, and you're going to speak in Lisbon and Porto and tell your story." So beautiful things have come out of these programs, really. And I can't wait because I want to see where I came from. Yeah.
Oh, that's very exciting. Well, we wish you easy and safe travels, hopefully as the pandemic subsides, and I'm sure what will be a very meaningful return to Portugal.
I see you have so many questions in chat. I was hoping that you'll be able to send them to me so that I can see what people ask. And I do want to mention that I will be moderating a film called "I Danced for the Angel of Death," the story of Dr. Edith Eckert, and she was born in Kosice, as I was, but she ended up in Auschwitz.
So today's program is being recorded, and to everyone watching, we will send out a recording of Miriam's presentation along with some suggested resources. So we'll include the link to the panel Miriam's moderating with the Edith Eger story, also the book, Marion Kaplan's book, and some of the other resources she mentioned. And it's great to see people in the audience who, someone is Hungarian, Margaret's mother-in-law shared a similar experience to your mother, Miriam. So these connections are beautiful every time.
I want to thank you, Ari, for being an absolute gentleman and bearing with me this morning when I called you and said, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do. My internet's down." You said, "Don't worry." I don't speak Hungarian anymore. It was my native language. The only thing I could say now, I see that as a question, is "Michinav," which means "How are you?"
Well, I guess if you could say farewell in Hungarian, then that would be a good closing because we're just about at the hour. But I guess we'll have to be satisfied with shalom, maybe.
Shalom and
Miriam,
yes.
Miriam, we're very grateful for you spending your time with us today, for making this work, even with the Wi-Fi snafu. Your story is so meaningful, and I know I learned a lot, as did the audience. So thank you again, and
thank
we wish
you very much for the opportunity.
Good luck with your presentation later today.
I send my kiss farewell to everyone. That's the Hungarian kiss.
All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Miriam. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.